Brilliant. Thank you very much, David. We're now going to bring back Dame Judith Hackett, who will join us onto the panel. And I'm also delighted to be able to introduce another panel member. That's May Winfield. May is an Associate Director of Buro Happold Engineering. She is also responsible for an awful lot of the legal information around building information modeling and digital, and in particular has been a co-author of a report looking at how we actually set the rules of digital in projects, so how we set the projects up for digital. So just here comes May. Good morning, May. Nice to have you on the panel as well. So once again, everybody, you have the opportunity using the chat function to ask questions. We've already got a huge volume of questions. We're not going to get through all of them. I'm going to go straight in and just ask the panel, in terms of procurement, does the procurement method like design and build limit safety? And will design and build as a procurement method survive this new move towards driving safety? Dame Judith, do you want to start with that one?
I'm happy to start with it. I think the answer is it will survive if it changes, and I think that speaks to very much to David's presentation. Any part of this sector who thinks they can survive by standing still or defending their current territory is sadly mistaken. Every single part of the industry, including the whole design and build philosophy, needs to think about what is its role in delivering on all of those things we've talked about. Building safety for my part, sustainability, responding to those new needs. It has to be about adapt and change if you're going to survive.
Fantastic. I've noticed some of the comments in there. There was one comment about similar or approved. I always shiver when I see this phrase similar when we're talking about products, because a chocolate block is similar to a concrete block, performs very differently in fire. So let's please not do that. In terms of, David, this change to the industry, the last few slides you were showing were really quite stark in terms of this transformation. And this whole session is about the changes, the big drivers of change. What should a main contractor be doing in light of the evidence that you're providing?
Yeah, that's a good question. And Richard, we were quite surprised actually by how dramatic the results of the survey were. So we were also surprised. I think if you take a contractor as an example, there's a couple of strategic questions. So is it a case for them of transforming to deliver within their existing business model, or do they need to think more radically about potentially even new business models? So let me try and explain that a bit more. So if we're thinking about whether they transform or not, this is about understanding how can I improve the current way that I operate as a business. So this is about using integrated models to design and track materials through manufacturer, through logistics, through installation. It's about using on-site productivity tools to take 20% out of the waste that I have on my construction site. So how do I do my core business more efficiently and more effectively? The second question they should ask is what opportunities are there to reimagine my business model. So this is what some of the modular players are doing, where they're moving from traditional installation contracts to thinking about how do I totally standardize the elements that I'm using? How do I become actually an installer rather than a contractor? And what opportunities might there be in that new business model? So I think thinking about this in terms of both transforming and accelerating my traditional way of working and what new opportunities might there be to deliver a totally new business model would be what I would be asking as a contractor.
And May, the golden thread has been much talked about, but so have responsibilities and accountability. And that's got to start with how you set the project up, I would guess. And you wrote the report with the UK BIM Alliance looking at how the best practice should be. What are the steps that people out there who are watching this, what should they do now?
I think one of the problems with the industry is that often people just say, go and do it. and there's very little detail at the start. What you do need to do is make sure the requirements are very clear, what the client is expecting. If there are regulations, don't just say comply with the regulations, have some more detail as to being project specific. As we move on, and all the things that David, Dame Judith Hackett have talked about, we do need to see how we move from having late variations. For example, there needs to be an earlier design freeze. There'll need to be more use of technology. And it's a matter of don't just say do BIM or we want a golden thread. It's what does that mean for those parties? And I would say, from my experience, it's always good to start at the beginning with a blank piece of paper and say what's the process you want to use for this particular project and where could it go wrong, and how those obligations going to be allocated so that that's reflected in your contract. And if something goes wrong, you aren't spending a lot of time and money arguing the point.
Yeah, one of the questions that came through was, should we have a default set of data for buildings? Well, obviously, I'm going to argue that that's MBS. We've got that default set of data. In fact, the Chorus use, our MBS Chorus platform, I think the growth was something like 350% since the start of lockdown. So that transformation is already happening. But I want to come back to the thing around quality and around the move from building to assembly. And Dame Judith, just coming back onto this one, one of the questions has been around the Clerk of Works and managing quality on site. Mm-hmm. Should we be moving back to that focus? Because I know for architects, it's about they're going to inspect rather than supervise, but that supervised stuff is really important.
Okay, I've dealt with this question a lot about should we go back to Clerk of Works. I think if the industry is convinced that Clerk of Works is the way to go, that's the way forward. But let's see it as Clerk of Works in a new context, not going back to how it used to be. That's the bit that worries me about that. It's clear you've got to have someone responsible for ensuring quality of work on site, or in the factory if the work is being done in a modular form. Because that assurance of quality has got to be provided to the customer, to the regulator, and so on. And at the moment, it's not there. If we want to go back to calling it Clerk of Works, fine. But I suspect that in the current climate and going forward, there would be a better way of describing it that encompasses that role, but takes it forward in a new context.
Yeah, and just following through on that around for product manufacturers, we know obviously as we confirm leaving Europe, there's this requirement for a new product mark for UK construction products, and also the development of this register of safe products. Can you just tell a little bit more for the product manufacturers in the audience and for the specifiers who will specify them what that means?
Well, it's going to mean, I think, inevitably more testing, because this whole issue of how similar is a similar product that you referred to is constantly going to be challenged. And so I think that there will be much more focus on how do you know that product is fit for purpose? What is your evidence that it is fit for purpose? So using standard materials, and I think this drive to modularization and standardization is inevitably going to result in more standard construction and a lot less difference just for difference's sake, in all honesty.
Yeah. David, following on from that theme and into this transformation, it's astonishing to see the amount of money coming into the construction industry. I think it shows that this industry is ripe for change. We can see the drivers and the levers of change taking place. Where do you think that's likely to happen first? So you talked about your three areas: new business models, that industrialization, and then digitization. Where does this start?
So you see, I think you see the most I think the areas that have been first traditionally are actually the process industries. So if it have chemicals, oil and gas, they were kind of first to the party when it comes to modularization and digitization of a lot of their construction processes. Now you see it happening really rapidly in real estate and house building. So as we know in the UK, right, you've got a big drive for modular with a number of players, whether it's Ilke, Berkeley, others, who are really driving the modular agenda, and also digitization as well. So I think we can actually learn a lot from the process industries, and where we see it happening most now is in real estate. I think the when we think about this point about the investment that's coming in to the industry, I mean, it really is. It's not just capital that's coming into the industry. It's talent as well. So one of the companies that I work with in the US is a VC investor. So they speak a lot to the kind of people who are coming out of the schools in the US who are looking to move into technology, move into digital. And everyone is extremely excited about construction because it is seen as this huge opportunity. It's undisrupted. The industry is massive. The technical challenge is huge. So people want to come in. People are getting attracted to this industry in a way that they weren't before, which is pretty exciting.
And moving on just to competencies now. So this is changing the industry, and we need to change the industry. The Setting the Bar report was published last week, so we can now see that this will apply not just to the design professionals, but right the way through the construction process. But Dame Judith, as you said, we only have 2 years, so we should be starting now. If we look at the design industries, they've got a framework in place. What about people like the installers? Where do they go, and where should they start going to understand what their competencies should be?
Well, I think we have to start with setting the bar, because there's a huge amount of work has gone into looking at that across all sectors and all disciplines. I think it's key also, and I think I just want to pick up on David's point about learning from other sectors, because I think it doesn't matter whether you look at skills and competencies, whether you look at ways of using digital, whatever it is. If this industry tries to reinvent everything for itself from scratch, it's going to take a very long time, and you will lose out because of it. There are so many other sectors that you can look at and turn to say, how did you tackle this problem when you had it? And they will be more than willing to help. You've only got to ask.
Yeah, and another of the questions is, so for you, David, in other sectors, what were those catalysts for change? Was it top down or bottom up?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we looked at a lot of it's top down, right? So we looked at automotive, we looked at shipbuilding, a combination of kind of high volume but also low volume and high complexity industries. And if you look at the automotive industry, a lot of it was bottom up with the big inflows of capital. So it was the development of things like the Toyota production system, developments of technology that supported shifts to automation, but then also big investment from outside as well. And I think with our industry, given that it's so fragmented, given that it's so linked to kind of a social imperative, a social good, it needs to be a combination of the two. So yes, it's bottom up from the industry itself, but also it's coming through regulation.
And May, one of the things about change in an industry is the impact on the legal side. We use legal precedent to guide us in terms of the things that we know and the things we should and shouldn't do. BIM has taught us, of course, that can challenge the legal side. Where do we go now if we are trying to do this transformation? Where does the legal side fit in that? Does it have to catch up, or can it help us do that?
One of the problems we have at the moment is obviously there isn't much or any case law governing a lot of things. We've had what's reported as the first BIM case last year. And so what the lawyers are having to do is apply old cases to new technology. And sometimes it will work and sometimes it won't. What we will find is, as the cases go through the courts, we can't properly predict how the courts will particularly decide certain things. And I would say the safest way is to therefore make contracts clearer than you would usually and be more pedantic, because otherwise you will be arguing who's right, and you will both probably have experts who completely agree with you because there's such a deviation within the industry as to how you do BIM or how you do modular construction properly.
Thank you for that. Judith, coming back to the Building Safety Bill, we've talked about the in-scope buildings being above 18 metres, but I think there is an ambition to extend that to a lower threshold and also maybe into other building types. We saw that with BIM originally on government buildings being pushed to other building types. In terms of that extension to scope, do you know when that will that happen, and when
There's certainly a lot of pressure to do that, and I think what you hear mostly is that people want to look at building purpose as well, in as much as there is a sense that buildings that are complex, in as much as they are therefore looking after, for example, elderly residents or their hospitals. Those are some of the reasons that people would suggest they should come within scope. What you will notice if you read all the pages of the Building Safety Bill is that it allows for the regulator to extend the scope in the future. Should that prove to be necessary and justified, they could make a proposition to Parliament to extend the scope under secondary legislation. So I can't tell you when. What I can tell you is that we have to ensure that the regulator gets up and running successfully, which means managing the scope initially and prioritising, as I said. But I'd be confident that the scope will extend over time. So I guess the message to the industry is, don't resort to those old gaming practices of, well, if I only got to do that for 18 metres and above, fine. Do it and embed it in everything you do.
Absolutely. And that change will come. We will see those particular drivers. In terms of collaboration, our platforms are built around collaboration. We can have manufacturers actually invited into projects to write project specifications alongside the designers and constructors. That collaboration came through in your talk. It's a responsibility of those key duty holders. But what happens if they don't collaborate? What happens if one party doesn't do what they're supposed to do?
Well, it will depend upon the consequences, won't it? So I mean, part of the answer to that question is if someone is not doing what they are required to do as part of their duties, then they can expect that to get picked up by the regulator. But that's also a question for the industry and the supply chain. The laggards, the dinosaurs, I think from what you saw from David's presentation, are the ones who are going to drop off the end. People will choose to work with people who want to collaborate.
That is an absolutely fantastic way to end this session, actually. A wonderful statement. And I think what we've already seen in this first session is those big levers for change are taking place. We are now going to go into a quick 5-minute break, so you can go make yourselves a cup of coffee, etc. When we come back, we're going to hear more detail then about Offsite from Mark Farmer. We're going to hear about the standards that will help us in terms of digital from Dr. Anne Kemp, and see some of the things that MBS have been doing with Dr. Stephen Hamill. Please do keep sending the questions through. Do tweet on #CLS2020. But for the end of this session, can I just say thank you to the panel, and everybody will be back at 11:15. Thank you very much.